the most powerful military on earth, is rearranging itself under Iranian fire, and satellites caught it happening. It happened between July 7th and July 12th. 4 to 5 U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidons, one C-17 transport left the base in Sheikh Issa in Bahrain, the of the American Air Force in the region. They weren't destroyed, they weren't hidden, they moved. They've moved off ramps that Iran has been targeting since the beginning of the war. Now, to be sure, the United States still has overwhelming firepower in the region, but the Iranians now decide where that firepower is because the United States can no longer really defend it the way that they used to. Now, we have to be clear, we're talking about removal from open positions. These aircraft could be hidden in hardened hangars in other parts of the region. They could have been taken elsewhere. We don't know, but this is clearly running under fire. The American service members definitely left. We don't see them there. The base has actually stopped operating. So the personnel, the communications, none of that is appearing in commercial satellite imagery. And that is a major tactical, almost strategic victory for Iran, rendering the Americans helpless in some of their bases. So we have to be clear, this isn't panic. They didn't clear directly under fire, but they cleared because their position there was no longer tenable. Took a few days, it was orderly, but there's no question about what happened. All the high target, high value targets have been taken out of there simply because the United States can't defend it. And the base looks emptier from orbit now than at any time during this war. And this is when the United States needs it most. It's involved directly in exchanging so much fire with the Iranians right now. It really needs all its assets on tap, and it absolutely doesn't have it. What's happening now is a high stakes confrontation involving massive firepower and an attempt to make the enemy yield to your power. We're talking about 8,000 missiles and drones, 20 American sites hit at least, $400 million of damage done to a single naval headquarters. That's one headquarters. No one's calling ahead. Right now, the point is to cause as much damage to the United States as possible. And oh boy, are they causing a lot of damage. Bahrain is the smaller half of this story. Washington is reducing its exposed presence in not only in Bahrain, but also in Kuwait. There's further reporting in the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere. The United States is considering its entire presence in Kuwait, something that some analysts have noted would reverse its victory in the first Gulf War when it recaptured Kuwait from Iraq and turned it into the center point of its regional defense. Then there was an even bigger claim. On July 25th, satellite imagery showed American aircraft withdrawing from Al Dhafra in the UAE. There were 5 aircraft that had been there, weren't there the next day. Others also left Al Udeid in Qatar. Now you have to understand what Al Udeid is. Al Udeid is by far the biggest air facility that Central Command has. It's the largest American air base in the Middle East, one of the largest in the world. It's a hub. And here's the part that most of this media didn't cover, but we're going to cover here. It wasn't just aircraft. The warships that are stationed there deployed into sea. They didn't go on a mission, they just went out into sea because they felt that the port wasn't particularly secure. The problem with that, when they're out in the sea, they're basically sitting ducks. They don't have any ability to protect themselves. A lot of their systems don't operate when they're out at sea and aren't surrounded by the proper mission scope, by the proper facilities that go into that. Some of them are half torn open for maintenance. We're talking about a stationary billion-dollar target that Iran now has the address to. It'll be interesting to see if they try to target these ships and if they succeed in doing so. And in order for the United States to keep its forward presence in the area, it has to have those ships there, but they're not safe. And that's exactly the problem that they're facing with the Air Force, the problem that they're facing with their personnel. Iran is putting them in a place that's not safe. And because this war is so unpopular, the United States can't afford to lose personnel, can't afford to lose a lot of equipment, and therefore it is scrambling defensively to keep its hardware out of fire. And there we see a real flaw in the American strategy. And it's always been vulnerable, sitting that close to Iran, but until now, the bluff hasn't been called and those facilities haven't been targeted. So put the picture together here. You have an inability to intercept missiles, an inability to protect hardware, an inability to protect ships. The flight lines are bare, the harbor is empty, the headquarters are damaged, and a fleet that can't sit safely on its home port isn't really forward based anymore. It's a deployment that puts everything at risk without any of the benefits. And in order to understand why the United States is trying so hard to avoid being hit, we have to look at the numbers. The damage done to the Fifth Fleet's headquarters in Bahrain is estimated at around $400 million. Just the building. That's with the command structure, satellite terminals, all the infrastructure, etc. The headquarters isn't at Sheikh Issa, it's a separate installation up near Manama, so it's two different bases. They were both hit, and they both will cost a lot of money to repair. Across this war, the Center for Strategic and International Studies puts the total damage to American bases at between 2 to 5 billion. Across this war, the Center for Strategic and International Studies has put the total damage to American bases at somewhere between 2.2 and $5.1 billion. That's a sum that's going to continue growing as Iran continues to strike. At least 20 US military and diplomatic sites have been attacked. So understand what dispersal actually means here. Look, the Americans aren't going to use the term retreat. It sounds too much like a loss, but what is a retreat? A retreat is when you go back because you're not able to defend your lines. And that's what Air Force dispersal is. The aircraft is no longer safe. You spread them to other locations, further back, where they're going to be more protected. It's rational, it's professional, it's also an admission that the system is not working. Hardened shelters, layered defenses, Patriots, THAADs, the deterrence of the United States, the attempts by the US military forces to take out launchers before they launch at American bases, all that has failed. The entire protective architecture on which the system is built has failed, forcing the United States to evacuate its assets. That's a defeat. The shield is no longer trusted to hold. And one of the reasons the shield can't hold is because the United States cannot afford to protect them because, as has been talked about quite a bit, the interceptors just aren't there. The United States is running through its interceptors at such a pace that it can't continue to do so. It now has to allow Iran to just shoot at its bases at least some of the time, and that is an unacceptable risk to the personnel and the hardware at the bases. Look, at the start of the war, the United States had around 2,400 Patriots at its disposal. Now it has around 750. And that means that 67% of the entire stockpile has been used in this war. And the United States needs it for its other theaters as well. It can't just keep it only for Iran. There's other parts in the world that need to be defended so its enemies, notably China, don't take advantage of this lapse. And even the cheaper ones of those, the Patriots, they cost more than $4 million a piece. And by April, the US had fired over 1,200 of them. And we know what they're using it against. They're using it against incredibly cheap hardware. They're using it against these Shahed drones that the Iranians are flying out there. Many of them are made out of plywood with a cheap engine. But they're designed to cause quite a bit of damage, and it's very hard to ignore them. But even if you win every single one of those engagements, you still lose the war, because every single one of those depletes a missile. That's already a great use of a Shahed drone, and it allows them later to shoot better missiles at unprotected targets. There's just no winning any of this. And this isn't just a supply problem. This isn't just a tactical issue. It's shaping the strategy of the United States at the very highest level. General Dan Caine warned that the United States might be able to resume fighting now with Iran, but they wouldn't be able to defend their assets. And you may have noticed that Trump keeps posting, we're going back to war, we're stopping the war, we're going back to the war, we're stopping the war. There's several reasons for that, but the interceptors are one of the main reasons for that. The army is telling him, we can't protect our assets, we can't continue fighting at the level that we were fighting before, we simply don't have the interceptors to do it. There's a real concern, and the New York Times reported on this, that Trump is worried about how many interceptors he has left in the arsenal and what to do about it. So it's not because Iran has been beaten. It's not because the United States has achieved its political goals. Far from it. The interceptors and the lack of the ability to protect American bases are one of the main reasons the United States is being forced to stop this war in a war zone. Now, we've talked a lot about the United States, but probably the most important element here strategically is its influence on the Gulf states. Put yourself in their position. They've withstood a lot of criticism from their people and from their enemies like Iran and others for creating these massive bases or allowing the US to create these massive bases on their territory. In return, they wanted to get protection from Iran, protection from other threats. Instead of bringing protection, in the end, these bases have brought war to their doorsteps. This is not protection. This is not safety. The bill has been staggering for them. You've had economies decimated by destruction of infrastructure, by the lack of tourism, by the drying up of investments, and by the closing up of the Straits of Hormuz. Gas complexes like the Ras Laffan gas complex have been damaged. It's just a really serious problem. And seeing that the United States is moving its aircraft and that it doesn't have interceptors anymore makes them feel very exposed and very vulnerable. You know, there's a real structural unfairness behind all this. The Gulf states are paying the price for the war, but they had no voice in when to start it. And they have some voice, but not direct in when to finish it. It wasn't their choice. Only the Americans, the president, decides when you go to war. So you have a lot of countries in the Gulf rethinking, do they want to continue this deal? This deal that maybe hasn't worked out as well for us as we'd like. Now, to be fair, every Gulf country is responding to this differently. Qatar, for example, is pushing deeper into security partnership with the US. So is the UAE. Meanwhile, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia seem to be going in a different direction. But I would caution against taking too much of a direction from what's happening right now. Right now, the United States is still necessary because they're at war. The United States will still be necessary in order to enforce whatever agreement, whether de facto or written, that comes into play after the war. But once this war ends and is in the rearview mirror, then what? That becomes the question. Now, you have to keep in mind there is another address for the Gulf states, and that's China. It used to be completely theoretical to think of Chinese influence and power in this region, but it's really not theoretical anymore. All 6 Gulf Cooperation Council states, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, went to Beijing to ask them to pressure Iran into opening the Straits of Hormuz, because they knew that China has influence over Iran that the United States simply doesn't have. When China calls, Iran answers the phone. When the US calls, Iran sends a missile. The US is its dyed-in-the-wool enemy. China has the ability to get the phones answered. Now, of course, China can't replace the US in the amount of protection that the US brings. It can't keep the Straits of Hormuz open with its navy. But, of course, the United States has failed to keep the Straits of Hormuz open, and it's their military power that caused the problem. So what a lot of people are thinking is China maybe can't exchange the Americans in terms of military protection, but what it can do, theoretically, is bring peace to the region. If the United States is out, China might be able to bring Iran and the Gulf states closer together. They already did this a few years ago when they managed to bring about normalization between Saudi Arabia and between Iran. They can bring peace. A senior Saudi official recently said China is the only country in a position to both pressure Iran and offer assurances to Saudi Arabia. And they're talking, at least partially, about the ability that China had, like I said, in 2023, to bring the Iranians and Saudi Arabia together, to normalize their relations. And maybe they can do it again. Maybe they can bring deals about between Iran and all the countries in the Gulf. The United States certainly has shown that it can. So China is bringing something different. Not a security guarantee, not a military presence, but peace and perhaps economic links that join the region together in a way that's not contested, in a way that benefits everyone. If oil is flowing, tourism is flowing, investment is flowing into the Gulf, and missiles aren't flying, it's really better off than they are right now. And, keep in mind, Saudi Arabia has had these incredibly ambitious deals to change their entire economy. Think of Vision 2030. They wanted to move away from being an oil economy because they know that fossil fuels are going to become less important over time, and also it's unstable. The price goes up and down, as we've seen. They want to have tourism, high tech, foreign capital. And this war has set that plan back for years. They weren't on target to achieve it anyway, but this has made it completely impossible. Maritime insurance premiums are up. Hotels are empty. Foreign investment is down by 60 to 70%. You can't build these kinds of mega projects when missiles are flying. No one's going to come. Even if you have the interceptors, which you don't, no one wants to go to a fancy hotel that's being protected by an interceptor. And that's why some countries, like Saudi Arabia, tried not to join in the war, at least not in a major way, but to sit on the sidelines and often try to negotiate an end for all of this. This isn't just a security problem for these Gulf states. This is also a balance sheet problem. And the United States is causing that balancing problem. So let's not get ahead of ourselves. The Gulf states aren't moving to China yet, but they're all starting to think about this appealing alternative that's on the east. If the Iranians can actually get the United States out of the Gulf, not only in terms of bases, but in terms of its influence, it will be an absolutely incredible military victory for them. It'll be an incredible military victory for China. And keep in mind, one of the reasons all this damage is being done to these American bases is because of China. That's not a coincidence. They've given these satellite coordinates, they're giving chips, they're buying the oil that's allowing this to continue. China is behind a lot of this damage because it benefits them geopolitically. So every country in the Gulf is thinking about its options. It's no longer automatic that you turn to the United States. Maybe you turn to China. Maybe you turn to diplomacy instead of warfare. And meanwhile, the United States will be moving more to Israel. They're going to be moving more to areas outside of the Gulf because they feel like they're being exposed. And that's going to play into China's influence, and it's going to play into the sense in the Gulf that they're being abandoned, that America's unable to protect them, and that they need to find more answers elsewhere. They need to move more towards peace. They need to move more towards China. The world is watching. Iran and the United States are facing off, and so far, it looks like the United States is blinking, and the consequences could be very severe. Subscribe to W for daily geopolitical analysis.